We're just waiting a few seconds here to verify that we're actually streaming. Oh, okay, there we go. Get over and get our PowerPoint ready, guys, and then we will get started. Okay. Good afternoon or happy lunchtime, guys. Welcome to our presentation today, Avoiding Ghosts from Leases Past. Take care of a few housekeeping things first, and then we will be moving on from there. If you are here watching today because you need Lead Scholars credit or some other form of credit, there is a Qualtrics form linked in the description box below that we ask you to fill out. We actually would love any student who's watching today to go ahead and fill that out. Because we're also looking for ideas in addition to getting your information so that we can tell people that you were here and verify your attendance if you need us to. We're also looking for ideas for presentations that we can do in the future. This is our last presentation for spring, but summer will be here and then getting ready to do programming in the fall, and we would love to know what you guys would like to see us touch on. I will pull those responses tomorrow morning-ish, and we'll submit them then. So if you could go ahead and make sure that you take care of that, I would really appreciate that, so I can go ahead and make sure that you get credit for attending today. I think that's it as far as housekeeping goes on my side for what I need to tell you. For those of you who don't know who Student Legal Services is, if you are a student here and enrolled in classes, you have to be enrolled in classes when you come in to see us, but we provide free legal assistance for students. And that includes landlord-tenant, which we're going to be talking about today, but consumer issues. So if you're having any sort of billing issue, traffic issues, there's something on your credit report that shouldn't be there, most criminal stuff, uncontested divorces, name changes, simple wills, bankruptcies. We cannot handle student versus student matters or matters against the university, student conduct, that sort of stuff. And there's a few other things that are just too specialized or, just really beyond what we can handle. But we do a lot of things. So if you're ever in an issue where you're not really sure what to do or where to go, our office is a great place to start. All of our contact information for our office is down in the description box. We're in the student union on the 3rd floor, just outside of the game room and the lounge where the microwaves are. And we'll be seeing maybe more of you when fall starts again and things get back to normal. If you're not on campus, that's not a problem. We're still here for you. We never closed during all this remote work, and we are still, taking appointments and doing things. If it's an issue outside of our area, like if you got a traffic ticket back home, we may not be able to represent you, but we can at least still give you some advice. Patricia, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Patricia Delahan. I'm one of the attorneys here, the director. And myself, along with Jami and Michelle, we do what we call the civil work, which basically is leasing, family law, bankruptcies, consumer type of issues. And then we have another attorney who does the criminal work and the traffic. And the things that we see students most about would be leasing issues, consumer issues related to leasing issues, kind of a big issue, and then traffic. And so if you have any questions, if you ever are in doubt about something, you're more than welcome to reach out to us, as Jami said.
Michelle, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Michelle Koo. I'm also one of the attorneys here. And the three of us whom you're seeing today, we handle the civil cases, which I just described to you. And we're glad to be here. We're glad you're tuning in. This topic that we're covering today is one of the biggest reasons why students come in to see us, as Patricia said. And it's really a good chunk of probably each of our days, as opposed to different other kinds of cases that we handle. I mean, we handle other stuff too, but rental issues and monies owed to former landlords, that's why the title, Ghosts of Leases Past, is something that comes up all the time. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Jami so we can get started.
Yeah, so my name's Jamie. I'm one of the attorneys here as well. I do the civil stuff just like the other two attorneys who are with us today. I also do all of this stuff. So if you have watched any of our previous videos, you probably have seen me or have seen me partnering with some of our other groups. And so if you're a student or someone else who's maybe interested in partnering with us, you can always reach out to me again through the contact information that is in the description box below. So we call this avoiding ghosts of Lisa's past because there are things you can do prior to the end of your lease that can help you avoid issues in the future. Because one of the things that we see, in August, September, October, a lot of times that's our busiest time of year because students, a lot of leases end at the end of July, and then they get a bill at some point in August, towards the end of August, September, beginning of September. So lots and lots of students come in to see us talking about what, to deal with what happened. And a lot of times, once those charges are incurred, yes, there are things we can do, we can help, but there are things that could have been done previous to that point that could have put you in a better position. So rental issues are the number one reason we see students have something in collections on their credit report. Um, damage charges, alleged rental monies owed. So I'll talk a little bit about, we're going to hit on all these different points coming up. Not giving proper notice, which usually leads to what we call liquidated damage charge, which is a set amount that you agree to pay for failure to do something. Or as a penalty for breaking the lease or something, breaking a contract, something of that nature. And then damages charges, so alleged holes in the wall or paint or things like that, stains on the carpet. So we're not going to go too much into rental monies owed because um, we have some other presentations that you can watch on our channel that kind of goes into what to do if you can't pay your rent and some other issues like that. But if you're evicted for a non-payment of rent or a violation of the lease, you still owe rent. You also, if you leave early for some reason and you don't make some sort of arrangement with your landlord. So we saw that a lot last year with COVID. Lots of students, in March kind of went home and left, and maybe because of COVID, lost their jobs and they were no longer able to pay. They kind of moved everything out, and there you owe rent until your space is filled. Landlords may also accelerate rent, which means make all of it due at once. Um, and if you have an eviction, um, because you couldn't pay, or if you've otherwise allegedly violated the lease, you can save yourself some money if you move out voluntarily before the eviction is filed. Because at that point you would owe attorney's fees typically, as well as court charges. And the main reason we see students be evicted for other things besides non-payment is drugs. So landlord says that they're going to be doing inspections. They come around and they find your paraphernalia. sitting on your bedside table, your water pipe, or whatever it is. And a lot of leases have, zero tolerance, and there you go. Make sure the length of the lease that you sign will work for you. Graduation, study abroad, etc. is not going to get you out of the lease. So if you go off in spring semester to go study in Australia, but you were on a lease until July, um, you're still on the hook, and you're going to have to figure something out for that. Like I said, we have some other videos that kind of go into these issues. If you're having financial difficulties, also what to look for in a lease. We did one back in October of 2020 that kind of goes in depth of what to expect and some of those issues for that. But rent money's owed is one of the reasons why we see leases haunt people. You need to make sure that you get everything in writing. Make sure that the person who is supposed to replace you actually does replace you, and go from there. I've had students where they thought they had a replacement tenant move in, and it turned out that person never moved in, so they didn't even know that the rent wasn't being paid. So those are the sorts of things you got to keep on top of.
If I might just add something on that, is that most leases, most often see students who are being evicted because of marijuana use, and whether or not you have a medical card, it doesn't affect the landlord's ability to evict you. Like Jamie said, most student housing around here, if you're renting by the room, they do have a clause saying that that is a material breach, and that is a breach that cannot be cured. So if you are caught with, weed, we had a situation where UCFPD went by, they found this stuff because I guess somebody was complaining about the smell. They didn't physically arrest the students, they gave them a notice of appearance, but the landlord still finds out about it, and they ended up being evicted. It didn't matter, it was the first time doing this, that they promised never to do it again, because the lease says it's a breach that is materially cannot be cured. So if you happen to be an habitual user, either because of a medical card and need it out of necessity, I would not recommend leasing with student housing, because it's going to create a problem. So, and this is because from the lease. Some other leases, if you rent the whole apartment or a townhouse with other people, might not have this clause. But you have to assume that if you're going for student housing around campus, that all have this clause. So there's going to be a problem, whether or not your doctor has prescribed this to you. So just heads up kind of thing.
The way that medical marijuana, and I'm no expert, was kind of legislated in the state of Florida, it left a lot of room for employers and other parties to make rules curbing its use, even though technically, yes, you can in the state of Florida use it if you have a medical card. You know, the private parties can still make rules about its use, and it's still an emerging area with the conflicts between state and federal law. But Patricia's absolutely right that if you are a user and you're on a student apartment complex, it's definitely a reason why they can boot you out. They don't have to catch you smoking it if they, again, find the water pipe or your paraphernalia or whatever, edibles, whatever on the, your bedside table. That is enough.
Yeah. And then the issue with that is like you're being evicted, so you still owe the rent, even though you're not living there. And now you either homeless or you have to pay rent some other place. So now you're paying rent at two places. And the issue is that if you get evicted in the middle of the semester, it is very difficult, even before the pandemic, to find someone to replace you, because student housing students usually look at the beginning of each semester. So if you get caught in February or March and you kicked out and now you have to leave and there's no one to replace you because everybody has already found housing, you're going to be on the hook until the end of July, even though you're not living there. So just something to really consider if you're in that situation.
So this is kind of the reason I think that spurred this presentation is that we saw, in part due, I think, to the uh, pandemic and people maybe not being local as much as they would have been in previous times, having some issues with the notice requirement. And Patricia, I know you saw this a lot. Did you want to
And I'm still
kind of?
seeing it a lot. So a couple of years ago, maybe the new statute was passed that allowed the tenant, the landlord. So when I say landlords, I mean the lessor, the company they rent from, that allows them to include a paragraph in the lease that requires you to give advance written notice that you'll be vacating when the lease ends. And that if you fail to give that notice, you owe the landlord liquidated damages. Now, what does liquidated damages mean is that you owe the landlords, in all likelihood, an additional month's rent. So if your rent ends July 31st, if you don't give that 60-day notice, then, when you vacate on July 31st, you're going to be shocked to get a letter from the landlord that only you're not getting your deposit back, but you're owing the landlord additional monies because you didn't give this notice that you're going to vacate, and now they charge an additional month's rent. I think that you have to assume that every lease contains a 60-day clause. Perhaps with the exception of like where you rent by the room, we don't see that as much. But if you're renting the entire apartment with your friends and everybody signs the same lease, if you're renting a townhouse, if you're renting a single home, you have to assume that you are required to give a 60-day notice because they're all including this. It's a way for them to get some extra money. So I guess you just have to start with the assumption that, yes, you have to give the landlord a notice that, in fact, you're going to be vacating on the last day of the lease or the lease ends.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, technically, per the law, the landlord is supposed to give you 15 days notice before the period starts. So if it's 60 days, that would be 75 days in advance. But the landlord only has to give the notice. So in Florida, that can be just taping an envelope on your door or sliding it under the door if there's a gap or something of that nature. They don't have to show that you actually received it, that you actually were aware that it existed. They just have to show, usually one of their office staff are going to say, on such and such date, I went and I posted it on the door. And if you're not home, like I said, we had lots of students who were not local for various reasons over, that period, that they may have missed it. Also, what I know Patricia's seen recently is that the landlords have gotten pretty sneaky about including the notice. So they'll give you an offer to re-rent, which if you sign now, you blah, 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 it will be this rate and you'll save some money. But if you look at it further down, maybe in smaller print or, just kind of buried in all of the information that they're throwing at you, they include that notice. There's no statutory requirement that it be in, bold letters or anything like that. They just have to give it to
and
you.
there's still a question of whether that's in good faith and whether whether it's valid. And I think there are arguments there that it's not in good faith, it's not valid. But it's not.
But you don't want to
you prefer not to be in.
Yeah, just don't put yourself in that situation to begin with, because then you're fighting about, with the landlord about that. If you take it to court and the judge goes, no, that's fine, and you lose, then you're paying the landlord's attorney's fees, and you're out the money, and all of the other stuff. So a lot of these landlord-tenant situations, we really just recommend that you try not to put yourself in that situation to begin with, because you'll save yourself a lot of time and headaches. You just won't even have to really worry about this. Now, this is not as much of an issue typically in student apartment complexes, because if you're renting in a student apartment complex, you know that they start in like October, if not sooner, trying to get you to sign for the lease that will start in August the following year. So usually by that point, they kind of know, but their leases usually still do contain a notice requirement, and you still are required to comply with that. So you need to make sure that you're doing that.
Jamie, let me interrupt real
Mm-hmm.
briefly here. No, before we move on. This is an issue with some of our international students too that I've seen, because they may not have been used to in their own country having to give notice in advance of a lease expiration. They just figured, okay, my lease begins on one date, ends on another date. I plan to move out by the ending date of my lease. I cleared everything out. I didn't cause any damage, turned in my keys, off I go. And then, like Patricia said, later on, they get the unpleasant surprise of being hit with a bill or an invoice or just charges that appear on their credit report or otherwise, that they learn about that they owe rent because they never gave notice of an intention not to renew. So that's what we're talking about when we say give notice, is you need to do it in writing, not oral, in writing, and just make it clear that you don't plan to renew your lease when it expires. There's no special language, or it doesn't have to sound like it was drafted by a lawyer. Just make it clear, put a date on it, do it in writing, and that way you've met that requirement and you've avoided some potential additional rent charges.
I don't think I said it before, but if you guys have questions, I am actually monitoring the live chat periodically. So you can go ahead and put that in there. Just some tips for dealing with this notice issue. I think we've kind of touched on some of these already, but basically just don't depend on your landlord to notify you of the period. Review your lease, see what it is, set yourself a reminder in your phone, or however it is that you set yourself reminders. Do it. Or if your lease is ending in July and you know it's coming up, look at your lease. Or maybe even don't just go tell, make sure you put it in writing, write out something that I do not intend to renew my lease, date it, sign it, keep a copy of it, and give it to the landlord. And I recommend that you make a note on your copy of who you gave it to, and when, just in case there's ever any question of whether or not you gave it to the person. You can also take like a good picture. I know everybody walks around now with a camera and a video camera. Some complexes like to insist that you fill out their form, but beware. I saw this last year. A student had been home, COVID, and they missed the notice that the landlord did give them. They found out about it later when they went back. It was there. But when they went to try to tell the landlord, like, I missed the 60 days, but here's notice, the landlord was very insistent that they fill out their form. But the form that the landlord wanted the student to fill out actually contained a lot more provisions in it. It increased the liquidated damage amount. So it had been a set amount in the lease, and then basically they made it like a daily amount in the notice, and it actually was worse off for the student to do that. They also include some set damage fees in that part of it, instead of in the lease. So, beware of that. You don't have to fill out their form. You just need to give them notice. And there's some debate in courts, because the legal system's kind of behind on all this tech stuff, is whether or not emails or text messages can constitute a writing. But there's never any doubt that a good old fashioned, handwritten or printed out piece of paper is a writing. So, print that out, write something out, hand it to the landlord, give them notice, document they do that. If they don't want to take it, that's a great opportunity to take out your phone and go, well, I'm going to videotape this, that I'm giving this to you and you're refusing to take it. So that's kind of where you stand with that. So just be careful, assume that you need to give notice, give it. Sometimes it's not 60 days, that's the max that they can do, but the vast majority of leases that we see are 60 days, the max.
If you also give the notice to the landlord, like in person, you can ask them to date and sign your copy acknowledging receipt.
Mm-hmm.
But if they refuse to, like Jamie said, you can always write down the date it was delivered, maybe take a video, and the name of the person to whom you gave it.
Yeah, that's really.
I'm not the landlord notice is kind of hard to know. I mean, if it's just a basic notice, it may be worthwhile doing it because then you can ask them for a copy. It will be signed by you and the recipient, the landlord that will be signed by both of you.
Yeah,
but you have to be careful if there's any other language there that includes anything other than you vacating on this day. Then then proceed with caution.
A lot of the forms are fine. They're totally fine. I've seen many of them. They're fine. There is one complex. I don't know if they're using it this year or if that was just last year that they were using it or whatever, that a lot of students live in. That's not all that far from main campus, that was doing that. So make sure that you are, looking at what you sign before you sign it. It was pretty long. Most of the forms that landlords have you fill out are not that long. So if you see it and it's got like all this language on it, that's a good sign that maybe you need to slow down and look at it a little bit more carefully. That's a good tip for pretty much everything. Because, if they can get you to agree to something more, they will, potentially in some circumstances. So be careful. Anybody else have anything else you guys want to add on the notice issue?
I think we've exhausted the subject.
Well, then we go on to my favorite. It's not my favorite. Damage charges. And this is kind of our bread and butter. Like I was saying, in September and October, typically, our students getting hit with damages charges for damage to the physical property. And Michelle, I know you are an expert on these issues. If you want to touch on some of this, and we'll go from there.
Sure. I don't know that I have that title, but but yeah, let's go through this. So a lot of students at student apartment complexes don't actually pay a security deposit when they move in. Sometimes they might think they do because they have to pay some money, but when we look at the lease, it says $0 for security deposit. The money they paid turned out to be for first month's rent, maybe an application fee, something like that. So if you move in and there was no security deposit paid, keep in mind, yeah, it was cheap to move in that way, but that means there's no money on deposit and there's no pot of money there for the landlord to dip into in case they find any alleged damages to hold you responsible for. So there's two scenarios on there. They're mentioned on the second bullet point on the slide. You either have a claim made against your security deposit if you paid one, or you get a bill if there's no deposit paid, or if you paid a deposit, let's say you paid $500, but the landlord is claiming $795. So you're left owing a balance. So this is something that we do commonly see. If you did pay a security deposit under Florida's law, you have 15 days from the date that you receive the landlord's notice of the charges to object to it. That's something we can help with. Please contact us. Sooner is better than later, obviously, because 15 days can go pretty quickly. And that's if you paid this deposit. If you didn't pay a deposit, that 15 days doesn't really apply, but we'd still like to see you in here sooner than later so that we can help you with it and try to keep bad things from happening potentially to your credit, to your cosigner or guarantor's credit, possible collection action. I think some of these things might come up on some further slides, but the damage charges can vary with the lease. And on the slide here, there are 4 bullet points, 4 sub bullet points that talk about a few different types of leases. So for student apartment complex, that's the kind where, particularly the ones close to campus, you may be sharing a 4-bedroom apartment, 4-bedroom, 4-bath apartment with other students. You're responsible for your room, your bathroom, if you have your own bathroom, and then a share, 1/4 share, theoretically, if it's a 4-4, of the common areas, kitchen, living room, dining room, etc. If it's a traditional lease, let's say you're not in a student apartment complex, like you and your friends or you and your boyfriend, girlfriend go and rent an apartment at a more traditional apartment complex where there's a bunch of other maybe non-students living there, you fall under what's called joint and several liability. I usually explain that as a one for all and all for one. So it doesn't matter that your roommate Johnny punched that hole in his bedroom wall when he was drunk one night. You didn't do it. It's joint and several liability. You're all responsible for that damage. So it says joint and several liability, responsible no matter who caused it. Also, tenants are usually responsible for damage caused by your guests. So if you or your roommates have people over, they cause some damage, they spill a drink on the carpet, or they cause some other sort of damage, then yes, that falls back on you when the lease ends and landlord comes around and inspects and they find that carpet stain or they find that hole in the wall, they'll hold you responsible for it. The last bullet point says other, check your lease. A lot of leases have actual lists of move out charges, specific charges for specific items. You don't really get to bargain if you have a lease that comes with that. We've seen it as an attachment or an addendum to a lease. Sometimes it's 1 or 2 pages long. It will have set charges for specific things. So if they have to replace the drip pans on your stove, yeah, you can go to Walmart and get a set for a few dollars, but they might have down there $20. Light bulbs, again, you might be able to buy one for buy a box for a few dollars. They've got on there, $15. So watch out for stuff like that. A lot of leases will have things like that. So when the time comes for you to move out, if the landlord comes in and finds any of those things, they'll go by that list that they have attached to their lease and they will charge you accordingly. So again, those are things to be aware of, ideally when you first sign the lease, but certainly before you move out, you need to go back, take a look at what's in your lease and what it says you have to do before moving out. I think this gets into some of the other slides, Jamie, for some of the tips we're going to give you. But we're trying to give you some good information to avoid being in the hole where you're owing money or you're not getting a deposit back.
I put that in there about being responsible for your guests. I haven't seen it in a while, thankfully, but there was a very short period a couple years ago where I had multiple incidents where a friend had been over and I don't know what sort of glass bottle it was, but I assume that they had been drinking and threw the glass bottle into the pool. And it was right at the end of the lease. And then the student was the one getting hit with the charges for draining the pool and cleaning up the glass because the bottle broke when it hit. I guess it must have been in a shallow end or something like that, and shattered. And so they had to drain the pool and clean up all the glass. And as you can imagine, that was quite expensive. And then another one where they'd broken the glass stovetop when they had some friends over, and different things like that. So just make sure that your friends don't destroy things or get a little too rowdy when they're there, because that can come back on you and it can be substantial. So
okay, go ahead. You're probably going to touch what I was going to talk about.
So we're going to move into tips to avoid or protect yourself from damage charges. A lot of times there's only so much we can tell you to do to avoid damage charges, because sometimes the landlord just going to do things that aren't right. Fortunately, we don't see that too much, but you know, on occasion it does happen, or they forget that something was pre-existing. So you need to make sure that you protect yourself from damages charges. So one of the main things that you can do is when you move out, well, one, clean and remove all your stuff. But once you've done that, document how you left the unit at the end, and preferably you would have done it at move-in too, but if you didn't, that's fine. Just really make sure that you document how you left the unit and be very, very thorough about it. So, under cabinets, in closets, inside of appliances. I used to get pictures of pristine looking kitchens that look like you could eat off the floor, so to speak. Not that I would. And, you know, you would then get hit because they said that the refrigerator had stuff left in it, or the oven was filthy, or something of that nature. So, you know, you need to make sure that you document very, very thoroughly. I'm a huge fan of video, because what used to happen is that we get stack of pictures, and one white wall in an apartment looks like another white wall. And how do I know what room I'm looking at? I have no idea. How do I know what bathroom I'm looking at? I have no idea. I didn't live there. So, and sometimes if it's been a little bit since you took those pictures, or they get out of order or something like that, you may not remember what room it was from either. So a really good thing, especially if you rent a full apartment, or something like that, is maybe make a short video per room. Show all four corners, um, you know, inside appliances, all of those things. Make it very thorough. You might want to show the fans working, turn the lights on, show all that the light bulbs were all working. Um, you know, if you're required to have replaced the air filter, maybe show that it's a clean air filter, um, you know, those sorts of things. And, you know, look in your lease to see what you're responsible for. Um, Keep a copy of your move-in report, or try to get one if you didn't keep a copy before you move out, of the stuff that you marked down that was wrong when you moved in. A lot of complexes, just because they have so many people who leave at the end of July, are not going to do a move-out inspection with you. A more traditional complex that doesn't have as many students might. And if you do get one of those, make sure that you keep it for your records. Um, Report any repair issues promptly. So when stuff comes up while you're living in the unit, make sure you report them promptly. Um, it's a good idea to keep documentation of doing so. I know a lot of times now it's all electronic. Take a screenshot, you know, control print screen, save it, you know, in a folder on the cloud somewhere. I had a student some time ago come in because she had something in collections from an old apartment she'd lived in a few years ago. She didn't even know what it was about. We figured it out, and it turned out they had been charging her for water stains that were a result of a air conditioning issue that she had from an overflow. And she seemed to be one of those people who kept everything, and she actually had the stuff from then, and we were able to argue, and never heard anything more about it in collections ever again after that. But you know, it's a good thing to keep. You also can be charged by your landlord for, you know, further damage that's caused if you don't report an issue promptly. So if you see a minor leak and it, you know, obviously it's going to cause more damage over time. There's going to be more, you know, water damage. Um, you know, you're going to want to go ahead and report that as soon as you notice it, because if there's ever an issue. I know Michelle's had to deal with this, where there was an issue where someone
Yes,
allegedly didn't report it right away, and it was a big old mess of what the tenant should be responsible for and what the landlord should be responsible for. So it's a good thing just to go ahead and do it. It's what you're required to do by your lease and really the law. So um, you should definitely do that. And then review your lease. A lot of leases sometimes require you to get the carpets professionally cleaned before you move out, and you'll need to provide proof of that or they'll hit you with it. And then, like Michelle was talking about earlier, there can be some set fees for repairs that you've agreed to. If you take a look at those, you might think that they're kind of excessive for what they are. But if you've agreed to them, that might be what you're stuck with. And a lot of times there'll be something in there that if it ends up being an extraordinary repair, something like that, that they can do it in excess of those charges. So, it's a good idea really to protect yourself. There's some things that you're not going to be able 100% to do. So I know sometimes we've seen stuff about odor, um, strong odors left behind, whether they be pet odors. Good friend of mine recently moved out of an apartment, and even though the carpets were professionally cleaned and he only lived there for a year, they were trying to hit him with pet odor charges for that year of having lived there. And how do you detect odors, and what's really strong and unpleasant to one person is not unpleasant to other people. And I know we've seen that in the past with where they said that there was smoke, and the person said they never smoked, or sometimes against some of our international students who maybe use a lot of cooking spices that Americans don't traditionally use with our bland food. So, there can be issues like that that we just can't anticipate for, and it's really hard to document. But the best thing to do, is to look at that list of things. Sometimes they'll even give you a list of like a checklist to what you're supposed to do before you move out. Look at it. Make sure you give yourself time to clean the property when you leave. Get the carpets cleaned if they say you need to. Vacuum if there's carpet at all, or sweep. Um, Wipe everything down with cleaner. It'll go a long way towards you not getting some of those charges, because sometimes they do seem to be a little much for the cleaning the charges that they hit people with. So it's good to do.
The other thing is like most leases, I probably say all of them require you to do like a move-in inspection, and to usually they make it 24 hours from when you move in, or 48 hours to notify the landlord of anything that's strong with the place, whether it be carpet stains or the kitchen counter being scratched. You're pretty much given a set amount of time to report these things. And if you don't, the lease will say that it's presumed that the apartment was defect free. So it's really important that you report everything, even if it's something minor that you don't think it really bothers you. You want to report it because you don't get stuck with it. So if it's got a few stains, the carpet's a few stains, you don't think it's that bad, you still want to report that, because otherwise they're going to say you did it. So it's very important that you turn in the move-in inspection report, and then you keep a copy of it. And ideally both you and the landlord will sign that move-in inspection. And you'll have a copy to show what was pre-existent and what was not, because that does happen.
I mean, a really good idea would be, we know a lot of people are at the end of their leases now, but maybe a tip for the move into the new unit that you might be going to is to, as soon as you get your keys, don't even bring anything in with you. Just go up to the unit and take a video and point everything out. If your landlord doesn't give you a move-in inspection sheet, most apartment complexes are, but let's say you're renting from a private individual, or maybe a kind of absentee property management company that might be a little bit more hands-off. There are move-in inspection sheets that you can find online. There are some apps and stuff that for tenants they'll walk you through. There used to be one called Rent Rhino. I'm not even sure if that's still in existence anymore. I haven't checked in some time. That would actually walk you through like doing a move-in inspection. But video is a great proof. I had some clients, a graduate student and her husband, they had come in, lived in an apartment complex, ended up with some like under $200 worth of charges from a previous apartment complex. We disputed them, went around and around, never really quite got resolved as well as we would have wanted it to. But they learned from that, and the time they moved into a house where they were renting, they took a video when they moved in and when they moved out, and there was something that the landlord charged them for that was pre-existing, that was like $2,000. And so those videos saved their hiney when it came down to it. Especially if you're renting a house, it does not take a lot for those charges to really get up there. Um, I've seen, damages charges from 1 year with a group of gentlemen living in a house that were almost $10,000. Those gentlemen did not dispute whether or not any of those things were true or not. It was more about the amounts that were being charged. So I'm not sure what was going on in that house during that 1 year, but must have been a really good time. The landlord said it looked like someone had been using the refrigerator as a skating board ramp. Don't do that. Because they ended up for that to be settled, spending not the full amount that was charged, but spending a good amount of money to get that from going further, to do that. So, just kind of try to avoid putting yourself in those situations with those issues in the first place. Really goes a long way. And then making sure, if you do leave it clean and you do kind of document how you left it, that gives you, a lot of, strength for if something does happen. And landlords make mistakes too. It happens, especially if they have a lot of people move out at the same time. I once had someone get charges for the carpet, and when they gave them the move out inspection, it said that the floors were fine. So it was like a mistake. So you just have to make sure that you have your ducks in a row just in case something does come up.
And with the move-in, with the move-in inspection, even though most leases require you to complete one, sometimes the landlord doesn't give it to you. So it's kind of, you have to be attentive to that, it's still there. So you still have to do it. You should do it to protect yourself, whether or not the landlord gave you a specific form. The other thing sometimes we see is like pets, a lot of times nowadays, they won't charge you a pet deposit. They'll charge you a pet fee and pet rent, but not necessarily a deposit. And if you have a pet, you are much more likely to be charged with a fee for carpet replacement, because if they discover like anything that they think is urine, they may go ahead and replace the carpet and the pad and everything else. So that's just something to consider if you have an animal where you're going to keep them or train they are, and really see, are you paying a pet fee or are you paying a pet deposit? Because you're seeing now they're trying to say it's a pet fee and not a pet deposit. So if it's a pet fee, are they really required to use that to cover any damages your animal caused? So it's I think there's foreign case law going both ways. So it's just something to kind of keep in mind. The other things, like when you're renting a house, particularly, there may be like some mandatory fees, like Jami said, for carpet cleaning or for general cleaning that they will charge you regardless. So that's something you probably want to kind of pay attention to when you sign the lease, to see if there's any mandatory fees that they're going to charge you regardless. So it's just something to keep in mind. So like you're not surprised when it happens, and you know exactly what the total cost of the rental is with those mandatory cleaning fees.
And one thing to know is that, like, a lot of times you are still going to have some charges when you move out of a rental, no matter what. So if your landlord is the one handling some of the utility charges, when you get the bill, it's for time that's already passed. So there might be your utility charges still owed when you move out, because they didn't have the amount that they don't know what the amount is the day you move out, until later on when the company or whoever actually does the billing, and reads the meter or whatever it is. So there can be utility charges that are completely normal, for that time frame. So it's not really that there won't be any charges when you move out. It's just to make sure that you minimize the charges, because sometimes they're really minimal and they're small and people are just like, I'll just pay it the $25 or whatever it is that they're charging me because they said that, um, I did X or whatever. That I left a bag of trash that I was supposed to throw out. And then sometimes, they're devastatingly large. And if you don't have any proof to show how you left the apartment, it can be very, very difficult to dispute those charges. Because a judge's position is going to be like, well, why would the landlord spend all this money to do X if you didn't actually cause a problem?
Well, I think if it goes to court, they would have to produce pictures of how you left it. I think the issue many times is that it didn't go to court. They send us to collections, and then collections reports this in your credit report. I think we see less and less lawsuits, right? I mean, there's a couple of ones for large amounts of money.
We don't really see, so I've been at UCF, it'll be 9 years this month. And in my time there, as far as a corporate landlord, so I'm talking about, student apartment complex, a regular apartment complex, or a property management company, Patricia's absolutely right. I have only ever seen them once file a lawsuit for damages, and that was where an individual had allegedly started a kitchen fire, which had caused, set off sprinklers and caused thousands upon thousands of dollars of damage, which is why we, recommend renters insurance, which we did just do a video on that back in July, or back in, not in July, in February, about, insurance, including renters insurance, to have, and what sort of types to protect yourself from a situation like that. But we do sometimes get these private landlords that are out there, and I mean, there are lots of things that happen. The last lawsuit that I was involved in that had a issue of damages charges, um, it's way more complicated than I can get into here, but it basically felt like the judge just kind of rubber stamped the damages charges, without really going into any of the details, um, even though there was some dispute on our end as far as those charges. So, it can be really difficult. The judge wanted the tenants to produce some sort of evidence that showed that they didn't leave the place a mess. And they didn't really have that because they had to move out in a hurry due to some other circumstances. So they're
There was a
just
motion for
tough.
summary judgment, right? There wasn't even a trial, right? There wasn't a
Yes.
motion for summary
That,
judgment. Mhm.
so to explain it, it didn't actually even go to where you had to produce evidence. It was still in a motion. It's technical, but yeah. So, there can be lots of circumstances that play out. Is really just best to protect yourself, document the condition. If you don't take those pictures, even if you happen to move out in a hurry, clean, do what you can. Most people know when their lease is coming to an end. They sometimes know that it's been a little bit more chaotic to make plans because things have been so unpredictable over the last year or so. But you have to kind of, make sure you can take the time to do that and clean it up, because it doesn't take much for them to really hit you with a bill. And then, those companies generally make it a little bit harder for you to dispute it. You have the dispute process with them, but if they don't back down or disagree, then they put it in collections, and then you're fighting in the collections process. Um, which has its pros and cons, just like everything else. So I haven't seen any questions. I'll give you guys a few more minutes if anybody wants to drop any questions into the chat. Patricia, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add of wisdom here at the end.
Also, wisdom. Yeah, I think I pretty much covered everything. Just, keep a copy of the move-in inspection report. If you can do an inspection when you leave, go ahead and do it, and keep a copy of it, document, take pictures, take videos. With your lease, know what's expected of you. And if you have questions, even like before you move out, you can always call us and we'll go over the lease with you.
Yeah, and if it sounds like we're being very picky about some of the damages charges, it's because between and amongst the three of us over the years, we have seen cases for every single one of those examples that we mentioned, sometimes multiple cases about people being charged for carpet, for water stains, holes in a wall, paint. You name it, we've probably seen multiple cases of people being charged for those. So, and keep in mind, we don't see everybody who gets charged. We just see the clients who know about our office and choose to contact us for legal assistance. There's, I'm sure, plenty of other tenants in that same complex in those situations who did not contact us for whatever reason. So these are all things that we've learned as attorneys by experience in the cases that we see come into our office. And so we're trying to impart some of those tips to you guys to hopefully prevent you from ending up in that kind of situation where you're left owing a balance to a landlord or not getting your deposit back. Sometimes if you rent a house or a condo, those deposits can be quite high. If it's a month rent, it could be $1,200 or more. So sometimes it's a lot of money that's at stake here.
Mm-hmm. I even see sometimes when it's a private landlord, like 2 months of rent is actually what it ends up being. So, yeah, you can really have a lot, or even with some of the complexes that don't normally take deposits, if you're an international student because you don't have any sort of history here or have a guarantor with any sort of history here, we do sometimes see them take somewhat significant deposits from people. So it really can be a lot of money at stake. And there's always lots of nuances to everything. Everything's very fact specific, but just making sure that you do what you're supposed to, whatever the lease says that you're supposed to do. You give the notice. You make sure that you leave the apartment clean. I've heard students, so I cleaned the bathroom, I left it clean, and then I get a picture and it's a white tub is black. So, you make sure you actually clean and leave it clean, or, you will be hit with charges, and sometimes that they can seem a little high for what they are. But if that's what the landlord is paying, that's kind of what it is. And then you're kind of going from there. I haven't seen any questions come in, so I'll just wrap up reminding you guys that our office is in Student Union and we're in room 304 on the 3rd floor. We have started to offer some limited in-person appointments, and with phone and other sorts of virtual things we've been doing this whole time. A lot of students I know are really liking the phone appointments. So that's something we've always offered, and we'll continue to do so. Information on how to contact us is in the description box below. So our phone number, email, website, etc. is down there. Again, if you're watching because you need lead scholars or whatever it is, if there's something that needs to be filled out, or I need to send an email or something like that, put it in the Qualtrics form. If I have questions, we ask for your email, so I'll reach out to you if it's something I've never heard of before, because that happens on occasion. I can't keep up with everything that happens, but I will get back to you, and I'll be pulling those tomorrow morning and going ahead and submitting what I can or getting back to you with questions. I'll stop the share now. Just checked again, no questions. So on that note, we will go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you very much, everyone who came out today and watched the presentation. And we'll be letting you know about what we'll be doing next. We don't have anything on the agenda right now, but there will be things coming for summer and fall. And you can always follow us on Twitter and Facebook to, kind of keep track of when those things are going to be. And we thank you again.